welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are doing episode 2 of Watch Wars. I've done one episode already where we compared the Orient Ray to the Seiko SKX, and in today's video we're looking at two divers again. We are looking at the Oris Aquis alongside the Alpina Extreme 300. Now, both of these watches are very similar in both price and specs, and I thought they'd make the perfect combination for a video like this. So let's spin the camera around, we'll take a closer look at the watches. Alright guys, so before we start, just a couple of little changes that I'm making here since the last Watch Wars. First of all, I'm going to be giving the watches a score out of 10 in each category as opposed to a 5. So we have 5 categories. We have the first category, dial, and when I say dial, we're actually going to talk about sort of the face of the watch, the dial, the loom, the hands. The next category is going to be operation, and that's going to be the moving parts, the bezel, how does the crown operate compared to each other. After that, we're going to talk about the fit and finish, then the movement, and at the end I have kind of a subjective category that's called on the wrist, and that's just some of my general feelings towards each watch. So let's start off with the dial. So essentially this category, we are talking about the face of the watch, the hands, the loom, the dial itself, and also I'm going to bring into the equation the crystal. The sapphire crystal on these watches are both AR coded, and if you can see here when I tilt the watch up, you can easily see my reflection in the Oris compared to the Alpina. So the Alpina does take a little bit of an advantage there. Now the finishes on the dials are two different finishes. They're both black, but the Alpina has a more of a glossy finish dial compared to the matte finish of the Oris. The Alpina also has a lot more going on the dial, including the framed date window, which shows 3 dates. It has a raised chaptering, you can see here, and it's just got a little bit bolder hour markers and hands as well. With that being said, though, I do like the simplicity of the Oris. I also love how they've kind of discreetly placed the date window. It's a black on black date window at the 6 o'clock position, giving it some nice symmetry. The handsets are really great choices, I find, for both watches, but for different reasons. The Alpina handset has much more flair and pop with that orange as well as the vivid white loom that's applied compared to the more simple handset of the Oris, but it just works with the design for each of these watches, so I'm not going to give either of them the advantage when it comes to the handset. Now, next up, I just want to talk about the loom for a second, and I'll throw a shot of the loom of both of these watches up right now. As you can see, the loom on the bezel of the Alpina is a different color than the hour markers and hands, and I really think that's cool, but the loom on the bezel and the hour markers actually fades a lot faster than the hands. On the Oris, on the other hand, it's more evenly applied, and it does last deeper into the night. Neither of these rank up there with a Seiko or anything like that as far as loom goes, but the Oris does have a slight advantage. So in this category, I am going to give the end advantage to the Alpina. The Oris's loom is a little bit better, but with the quality of the finish work on the Alpina dial along with the much better AR coding, I'm going to give the Alpina a 9 out of 10 and the Oris an 8 out of 10. The next category we are talking about is operation. That is the operation of the moving parts, and in this case we're talking about the bezel as well as the crown. Now, the bezel on each of these watches is a 120 click unidirectional bezel. The action on these is quite similar, has the same sound. They both feel like a very refined bezel, and I'm happy with both of them, and it's hard to differentiate between the two, to be honest with you. Once locked in, neither of them really have any play at all. Now, the advantage, though, is going to go to the Oris for a couple of different reasons. First of all, the coin edge on the bezel of the Oris is much easier to grip than this much smoother edge of the Alpina. Also, the Oris can be gripped in any position. You can grab it at the 3 and 9, at the 12 and 6, whereas the Alpina can only be adjusted at the 12 and 6 o'clock position. It's just the design of the case where it has these sort of steps out on each side. Makes it very hard to grab anywhere else other than there. So when it comes to the bezel, Oris is going to take it. So next up, the crown. So if I hold the crown side by side here, you're going to see that the crown on the Alpina is much larger than the Oris, and you would think that would make it easier to operate, but that is not the case. The Oris has a very deep knurling on its crown, and it makes it very easy to unscrew, adjust the time, and screw back in, even with gloves on. The Alpina has a very cool design, and I like that filled look with the Alpina triangle, but it is just not as easy to operate. So in the category of operation, I am going to give this to the Oris, and I'll give the Oris a 9 out of 10. The Alpina will get a 7 out of 10. In our next category, we're going to be talking about fit and finish with a focus on the cases as well as the bracelets. I have the bracelet here for the Alpina. So the case of the Alpina, as you can see here, is a combination of both polished and brushed surfaces. On the Oris, it is almost completely brushed, although there is some polishing on the top of the lugs, which match nicely to the polishing on the outer links on the bracelet. So as far as the finishing quality goes, I would say they're fairly equal to my eye, so I don't give one the advantage over the other. From a design perspective, I do prefer the Oris. I just love the look of that kettle-shaped case. I also think that the way that they've screwed on the crown guards is a really nice touch. I do like the crown guards on the Alpina, and I like how they've stepped up on the outside of the case, on the opposite side of the case, giving it some nice symmetry. But overall, I just prefer the case on the Oris over the Alpina. When it comes to the bracelets, for me, the Oris is by far and away the better bracelet. The Alpina is a very nice bracelet, although one of the things I'm not crazy about, there is no taper, and for a 22 millimeter bracelet, I find that it can pinch here on your wrist a little bit. A 20 millimeter, I don't mind no taper, but 22 is just a little bit too wide. We have a butterfly clasp here. It's pretty nice. It's not bad. It is signed with the Alpina triangle logo here as well. Now, the links are held together by push pins on this bracelet, and it is held to the watch by a spring bar. Now, the Oris, on the other hand, is held to the watch by these screws, and it also has screwed links. I find just the design of this bracelet to be much nicer than the Alpina, and I just love the look of it. The clasp is a super solid clasp. It has a nice solid diver's extension as well. So when it comes to fit and finish, both of these watches are very similar, but in this category, the bracelet of the Oris is just so much better than the Alpina, and I'm going to give the Oris an 8 out of 10 in this category, and the Alpina will get a 7 out of 10. In our next category, we're going to be taking a look at the movements. On the left in the Alpina, we have a Sellita SW200 versus in the Oris an ETA 2824. The Sellita is basically a copy of the 2824. So let me just flip the Oris over here and we'll take a look at the movement. So as you can see, they have the really cool red rotor. The movement has zero decoration, and by the way, both of these watches are about the same when it comes to accuracy, so neither of them wins out on accuracy. The only advantage that one has over the other would be the Alpina, where First of all, they have this really cool black rotor, but the Alpina is quite highly decorated. There's a lot of perlage going on, and so for that reason, I'm going to have to give the edge to the Alpina. And I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 versus the Oris, which I'll give a 7 out of 10. So for our last category, I'm coming in with another epic double wrist shot here, and this category is called On the Wrist, and this is a much more subjective category where I just talk about some of my feelings on these watches. And the biggest difference between the two to me is I find the Oris has a much more classic design. I could see it standing the test of time and looking just as good 10 years from now as it does today, where the Alpina has some trendier things happening with the filled crown as well as the crown being wrapped in rubber. I could see it going out of style after some time. I also kind of prefer Oris as a brand over Alpina. I find they have a little bit more to offer. I love both of these watches, but in this category, I'm going to have to give this one to the Oris with a 9 out of 10 and the Alpina with an 8 out of 10. And that is a total score for Oris of 41 versus 38 for the Alpina. So that's going to be it for our comparison. Let's spin the camera back around and wrap up today's video. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Watch Wars. If there's any other watches you've seen on the channel that you'd like me to do a comparison with, just let me know in the comments section below. I do have to say both of these watches are fantastic if anybody's considering either of them, even though the Oris did edge out the Alpina just by a little bit. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.